Hello and welcome to My PGCE, a podcast documenting my journey as a trainee teacher, with a special focus on mental health. I am your host, James B. Good morning. So here I am at the end of another hectic but amazing week of My PGCE. Alas, it's going to have to be another fairly brief episode because it's arrivals weekend. So if you've listened to previous episodes, you'll know that I'm a resident tutor at the university where I'm doing my PGCE, which means I live in halls of residence with undergraduates as part of the university's welfare system. And yes, today and tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday, is when all of the undergraduates arrive. I'm actually on call right now. So if the episode seems at all disjointed, it's because I've had to stop recording and jump up and deal with a moving in issue. But still, I will do my best. And the episode will have the usual format, overview first, then I'll zoom into a few things that I found particularly interesting this week. And finally, I'll talk about my mental health. But before I do that, a quick corrective from last week. So last week, I recommended the website MyBib, MYBIB, to help with referencing formats. And on the whole, I still recommend it. I think it's really good, especially if you're new to Harvard referencing. But it's not without its flaws. So if you want to say do something other than a book or a journal, for example, if you wanted to reference a chapter in a book, then it doesn't automatically pull that information up for you. You have to enter it manually. And also, when it comes to referencing a chapter in a book, it doesn't allow you to add the edition of the book in question. So you'd have to do that manually afterwards. So yeah, there seem to be a few hiccups like that, but on the whole, I still think it's good. Now, on with this week's overview. Last week, I said that on Sunday, I would be going to Thorpe Park, and that didn't end up happening for two reasons. First, I wasn't feeling very well. In fact, I haven't really felt very well since I started on the course. It's not COVID because I'm taking regular tests, but it's just general kind of head cold, cough, etc. So I wasn't feeling great and I didn't feel like I could enjoy a load of roller coasters, let alone a 3-hour journey to get there. That was one reason. And the other one was to free up some time so I could write my teaching philosophy, which is our first assignment, although it's not marked and it has a soft deadline. So yes, last Sunday, instead of going to Thorpe Park, I wrote my teaching philosophy, in which I tried to answer two questions. First, why bother teaching mathematics at all? I mentioned several reasons, but my main one was we should study mathematics in order to learn more about ourselves, because I think that the logical structures we encounter in mathematics are in fact the logical structures of our minds. Okay, so that's a big idea. If you want me to develop it any further in future episodes, please let me know. And the second question I tried to answer in my teaching philosophy, although it was only 500 words in total, so I didn't have a lot of room to maneuver. But the second question was, how should mathematics be taught? And I think that mathematics, perhaps like any other subject, should be taught in a narrative way. The lesson should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And these should perhaps loosely correspond with setup, conflict, and resolution. And these 3 acts neatly align with the Chinese 3 points framework, where you have the key point, which is the learning objective, the difficult point, which is the obstacle students may encounter as they try to learn the key point, and then finally the critical point, which is where, perhaps with the help of the teacher, students learn the key point while overcoming the difficult point. So yes, I think that mathematics should be taught as a narrative. So that's what I spent my Sunday doing. Then, from Monday to Thursday, I was in school. As of next week, I'll be in university on Mondays and then school Tuesday to Friday. But this week it was, for some reason, reversed. On Monday, I observed 3 maths lessons and a character and culture lesson, which, when I was at school, was called PSHE. It was a introductory character and culture lesson for year 7s. So talking about the sorts of things that they would learn in future lessons. Those things being health, employability, and relationships and sex education. And it was just wonderful to see that when sex education was mentioned, much of the room erupted in giggling, and then many of them remained very giggly for the rest of the lesson. That seems to be one of the eternal constants of the universe. Mention sex education to year 7s and they will giggle. On Tuesday, I would normally observe 4 maths lessons, but I only observed 3 because one of them was a year 11 exam, and so there wasn't much to observe. But after school, we had a new staff meeting where we were told all about the school's behaviour policy, which can be distilled into the motto, 2 warnings, then act. On Wednesday, I would normally observe 2 maths lessons, but this week it was only 1, again because the year 11s were continuing their exam from the previous day. So in my 4 free periods, I got started with my next university assignment, which is the comparison of 2 learning theories. And for that, I have chosen Bruner's discovery learning theory, where learners are encouraged to play an active role in the learning process, and Sweller's cognitive load theory, which suggests that learners can process only a limited amount of information at any one time. And I chose those theories because the latter somewhat opposes the former. So it seems that for some learners, discovery learning can lead to cognitive overload. And for them, it would perhaps be better to give them more support and structure. So I got cracking with that on Wednesday. On Thursday, I observed 3 lessons, maths lessons, and then got to go home at lunchtime because it was an open day. So all the students were being sent home at lunchtime so the staff could prepare to meet prospective students and their parents that evening. I say I went home at lunchtime, but actually the trainee teachers, a group of 6 of us, went to a local pub and had lunch, and that was really lovely. Then on Friday, yesterday, I was in university. We had 2 sessions. The first was about mindfulness for teachers and teaching, which I think was the best session of the PGCE so far, and by far. And second, we had a session on managing classroom behaviour, which was also really interesting. So that was my week in overview. Now I'll zoom into a few things. But first, if I may, I'd like to zoom in on something from last week, which I forgot to mention, but I think's important and may be helpful. So last Friday, I had a university session on critical thinking, where we spoke about the sorts of critical thinking required for master's level study, namely critical reading and critical writing. The word argument must have come up a million times. We spoke about comparing arguments, contrasting arguments, synthesizing arguments, assessing arguments, evaluating arguments, etc. But at no point did we talk about what an argument actually is, which you would have thought was crucial, because before you can compare, contrast, assess, evaluate an argument, you must first be able to identify it. So I thought I'd talk briefly about what an argument actually is. But first, what qualifies me to talk on this topic? So I studied maths and philosophy as an undergraduate, and then did a 2-year research degree as a postgraduate in analytic philosophy. And then my most recent teaching experience was teaching formal logic to 2nd and 3rd year undergraduates at the university where I'm now doing my PGCE. So I have some expertise in this area, but what I'm about to say isn't all that deep. What then is an argument? An argument consists of premises and a conclusion. A valid argument is one where the truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion. A sound argument is a valid argument with true premises. An example would be, all humans are mortal. I am a human. Therefore, I am mortal. That's a sound argument. The premises, all humans are mortal and I am a human, they're both true, and their truth guarantees the truth of the conclusion, namely, therefore I am mortal. Now, why am I telling you this? Because often when a student is asked to assess an argument, they don't know where to start. It can all seem quite overwhelming, especially if you've got lots of other things to think about. But in fact, to assess an argument, we need only do at most 3 things. First, we need to identify the argument. We need to pick out the premises and the conclusion. If you're looking at a journal article or even a book, then usually the argument is laid bare in the abstract, the introduction, or the conclusion. So first, identify the argument. Then, once you have the argument, first, check whether the premises are true. If they're not true, or perhaps if there's insufficient evidence to guarantee their truth, then the argument is unsound and the assessment is over. If they are true, then the next and final thing to check is whether the argument is valid. Does the truth of the premises guarantee the truth of the conclusion? If not, if there is in fact a loophole or counterexample, then the argument is unsound and assessment over. But if the truth of the conclusion is guaranteed by the truth of the premises, then the argument is valid and therefore sound. And again, assessment over. Now, my intention here was to help people with their critical thinking, but listening back to it, I think I may have just further muddied the water. But all I was trying to say was that when assessing an argument, all you need to do is check whether the premises are true, and then check whether the conclusion follows. Hopefully, that may help. Okay, now let's zoom into some things from this week. No more critical thinking, I promise. Something I've been thinking about in my observations this week is the starter exercise, and in particular, how the starter exercise is meant to relate to the rest of the lesson. If we see the lesson as a narrative, then perhaps the starter exercise is Act 1, the setup, or maybe even it's a bit of a prologue. Anyway, if learning is about making connections, then in order to make a connection with something new, you must have the relevant prior knowledge in mind. And I guess that's one of the purposes, if not the main purpose, of a starter exercise. It's to bring to mind the relevant prior knowledge, so it's there, ready and waiting to be connected to whatever the incoming information is. And that does seem to be the rationale behind most of the starter exercises I've seen. I say most and not all because some of the questions seem to be just for general revision purposes, but most of them seem to be specific and laying the groundwork for that day's lesson. For example, I was in one lesson where the learning objective was to find arc lengths and areas of sectors. No surprise then that the starter included solving equations, finding the area of a circle, and also rearranging and simplifying, all of which are required to find arc lengths and areas of sectors. But something I haven't seen is a teacher explaining explicitly to the students that the starter exercise is setting up the mind so that it has the best chance of assimilating today's learning objective. I mean, some students may spot the connection, but I'd wager that most don't. And I just wonder whether starter exercises would be even more effective if the students were told why they were important and how they related to the day's learning objective. So that's my question. If you have any thoughts, please let me know. The second thing I want to zoom in on is that mindfulness session that I had yesterday at university, and my two main takeaways. The first was to do with capacity. And I think this relates to cognitive load theory, which I mentioned earlier. So according to cognitive load theory, there's only a certain amount of information that learners can process at any one time. And I learnt yesterday that if you're already full, if you're already at capacity, then you can't deal with anything else. Now, this was part of a larger discussion about resilience, which can be defined as bounce back ability, your ability to bounce back after suffering a setback. And according to this idea, your ability to bounce back is partly determined by how much free capacity you have. And so if you want to increase your resilience, your ability to bounce back, something you can do or try to do is to free up capacity. And this is something I've been doing already, although I didn't think about it in quite these terms. So something I do at the weekend is my food prep for the week. I make a big batch of something, portion it up, freeze it, and then defrost it for dinner throughout the week. This frees up capacity. Essentially, dinner is one less thing I have to think about in the evenings, which gives me more room to maneuver if I've suffered any setbacks. So that was very interesting. My second main takeaway was to do with habits of mind. Now, a habit of mind, I guess, is a predisposition to interpret something in a particular way. And some of these habits can be quite harmful. An example would be catastrophizing. So if you tend to make mountains out of molehills, then this may cause a lot of unnecessary stress. And so it's important to be mindful of these potentially harmful habits, so that when something does go wrong or seems to go wrong, instead of just reacting, you can stop, maybe take a breath, and think to yourself, is this really a big deal, or am I just seeing it that way? Perhaps I should try to look at it from a different perspective. This reminded me of the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who, in a nutshell, said that even though we can't control the world around us, we can always control how we react to the world. In other words, we don't have to be ruled by these habits of mind. Instead, we can question them and perhaps dispel them completely. But I had a question here, which I asked in the session. If we're in a completely novel situation, as most of us currently are in the classroom, then how do we identify these harmful habits of mind? Because we haven't really got anything to go by. And I really liked the guy's answer. I say the guy's answer, he was the doctor of psychology who was leading the session. I really liked his answer. He said to just go into the situation with the attitude, let's see how it goes. Let's see how I am in this situation. In other words, he said, just go with the flow, which is exactly what I failed to do last week, and it caused me a great deal of stress. I should have gone with the flow, paid attention to how I was starting to react to things, and then I could have started to identify any underlying harmful habits of mind. That would have been a much better way to go. And it's what I'll try to do in the future. But some of these habits of mind are very hard to shake, and I suspect it'll take a lot of work. The last thing I want to zoom in on is something we discussed in our classroom management session yesterday at university. We spoke about Michaela School in North London, which has the reputation of being the strictest school in Britain. They have a no excuses behaviour policy. So detentions are awarded for arriving even 1 minute late to school, for not having completed homework, for scruffy work, for not having a pen or ruler, for reacting badly to a teacher's instruction by tutting or rolling eyes, and even for persistently turning round in class after being told not to. So yes, there are just no excuses. It doesn't matter what sort of background the student has, what their home life is like, whatever they may be dealing with outside of school, none of it matters. No excuses. If they lose a pencil, they're in detention. Now, this approach to discipline faces lots of criticism, not least among which being the idea that it is conducive to systemic racism, or is perhaps even systemically racist itself. Because in this Michaela school, the majority of students are from an ethnic minority background, yet the majority of teachers are white. And so the idea here is that with this approach to discipline, the students are implicitly taught to accept without question white authority, which would indeed be problematic. But I would like to pose another challenge. In fact, a dilemma for the no excuses discipline model. Someone called Jonathan Porter works at Michaela School, and he seems to be the champion of this particular discipline model. We were shown a video in our university session where Jonathan Porter tries to justify the approach by arguing that kindness, gratitude, and empathy must be taught by parents and teachers and learnt by students. I guess much like any other subject at school. But when it comes to those other subjects, pupil background is taken into consideration. You, as a teacher, determine their start point, teach them throughout the year, determine their end point, and then the difference between the two is called that pupil's progress. So if a pupil's starting point, their background, is taken into consideration when teaching maths or English or science or whatever else, then why isn't it taken into consideration when teaching kindness and gratitude and empathy? So here's the dilemma. Either you concede that kindness and gratitude and empathy aren't learnt, in which case you lose at least some of the justification for the no excuses approach to discipline, or you say that learning in general, be it kindness, gratitude, empathy, maths, English, science, whatever, shouldn't take into account a pupil's starting point, their background. And that would seem to be absurd. Now, there is a way out of the dilemma. You must explain why teaching kindness, gratitude, and empathy is somehow different to teaching maths, English, or science. And that's my challenge to Jonathan Porter and to whoever else champions the no excuses approach to discipline. Okay, that's enough zooming for this week. Now I will talk about my mental health, albeit briefly. I'd say that my mental health this past week has been generally pretty good. Still no depression whatsoever. I think that depression is something that creeps in when your mind is unoccupied. And my mind hasn't been unoccupied for quite a while now. My anxiety has been high-ish, but no higher than expected. I'd say I've got it mostly under control. That said, I did have a bad evening on Thursday. I was feeling pretty fried, but was determined to read a couple of articles ahead of the uni session on Friday. But then, just when I was about to start, the university sent out some new information. It was the weekly instructional coaching notes. So this is a collaborative document which I think me and my subject mentor at school fill in during my weekly mentor meetings. I think perhaps some other people, maybe my professional mentor, or maybe my professional practice tutor, or maybe my personal tutor, I think maybe they also fill it in at some point and to some extent in some regard, but I don't really know. Basically, the document is inscrutable. It is beyond comprehension. They provided with it an annotated version, which is meant to explain how to use the document. But I think the formatting has made all the annotations go skew with, and it just makes things even worse. So, I received this document on Thursday evening, tried my best to understand it, couldn't, started to feel stupid, which made me feel disheartened, kind of took the wind out of my sails briefly. But then I thought, no, hang on. Come on, I'm not stupid. This isn't my fault. This information is just being badly presented and organised. And this, I must say, has been a common theme on my PGCE course so far. Information is often poorly organised, poorly presented, and poorly formatted. So my sadness quickly turned into anger, basically. I was annoyed that I had been given yet another document that was very important by all accounts, but which I couldn't understand. So I started to draft like a complaint email. I was messing around with that for ages, drafting it, deleting it, moaning to other people, whatever. And so I ended up not reading either of the articles that I had intended to, and just got myself in a right tiz instead. But what I then learnt on Friday morning in the mindfulness session can, I think, shed light on my experience on Thursday evening. First of all, I had clearly ran out of capacity, and that document from the university sent me into overload. So I had neither the capacity to understand the document, nor the capacity to think to myself, okay, this is just another inscrutable document, but I don't need it right now. I'll just put it to one side and crack on with reading these articles. Because that's what I normally do. If I'm sent something that doesn't need my attention immediately, I put it to one side. I write it on my to-do list, which is how I normally free up capacity. Take it out of my head, put it on my to-do list instead. But on Thursday evening, I lacked the capacity to do even that, and instead went into overload. That said, I still had the wherewithal to question one of my habits of mind. So my first reaction was to think I was stupid because I couldn't understand this document. That's a habit of my mind. But then I thought, no, hang on, come on, you're not stupid. This is just a poorly presented document. But even though I managed to challenge my harmful habit of mind, it didn't really get me from feeling sad and disheartened and stupid to feeling at peace, but rather from feeling sad and disheartened and stupid to feeling annoyed and angry. And then I spent much of the rest of the evening being annoyed and angry, which solved nothing. So moving forward, I will continue to try to free up capacity so that I can deal with issues as and when they come in, but also so that I can figure out when not to deal with issues. That too is a decision which requires capacity. And I'll continue to try to identify and question any harmful habits of mine. But I also do plan to raise the issue of poorly presented information at a staff-student liaison committee, because I know that I'm not the only one who's had this problem. Okay, I think that just about wraps things up. I hope you too have had a week in which you learnt lots. Moving forward, the episodes may have a slightly different format because as of next week, my routine will be pretty constant. I'll be in university on Monday and then in school Tuesday to Friday, which may mean I won't have to do an overview every week. So instead I may just skip straight onto zooming in on certain things, but we will see. I hope you have a good week.
If you like the episode, please spread the word in person and on social media. You can follow the podcast on Twitter @mypgcepod or email mypgcepod@gmail.com. Please subscribe, rate and review in your directory of choice. Please also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/mypgcepod and helping fund both the podcast and my PGCE course. Thank you and talk again soon.